Here we are with our sixth session for the day. The session right now, which will start, is Data Driven
Data-driven
Decision Making, which will be moderated by Mike Conetta, a digital technology and customer data strategic leader, Web 3.0 advocate, non executive director who has an exceptional track record in enabling innovation and delivering commercial success. Over to you, Mike.
Well, good afternoon from not so sunny England, but yes, honour to be on this panel and chair this panel. Nice to be on the other side of the fence and get to ask the questions for a change. So yeah, it's we've got an exceptional panel today. Some people that I've known for quite a while, and some people I've just met recently. So looking forward to covering all angles of their business areas and bringing some insight to life. So first of all, I will go around our virtual room and ask each of our panelists just to give a brief introduction and the golden question, what data means to them and their organisation. So I shall start with Fiona.
Thank you very much indeed, Mick, and hello to the conference attendees. It's great to be speaking with you. So yeah, I'm in the very fortunate position where I work for a consultancy, so I get to work with lots of different organisations, different football clubs, different football events, different football governing bodies, and my role is really simple. I'm here to help our clients use data to increase revenue, participation and engagement. And actually, also, we've started to work with clients on improving their operational efficiencies as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Kirk, who's probably the earliest hour for him.
Yes, so down here in lovely Waco, Texas at 7:30 in the morning, our time. So yes, have two hats I wear actually. One is a Baylor professor at a university, but then also run a research company. We work with about 36 pro teams, mostly NFL, but every sport, including your form of football, like NYCFC and others. And the role that data plays here is really measuring the assets that teams sell in sponsorships and partnerships, and then showing the impact it has on brand objectives, and then reporting it to the brand on the behalf of the teams, what the impact is of what they sold and what the partners bought. And so it's very data driven, uncut, unbiased, scientific. Here it is. So every day, that's what I do.
Perfect. And over to Jake.
Hi guys, Jake Longworth, Head of Communications at Lincoln City Football Club. We are a professional football club in the third tier in England. Quite new into data, so won't be as technically as advanced as some others in the room, but we're definitely on the ladder and going in the right direction. So yeah, we work closely with Fiona at Winners, who have pretty much transformed our world in terms of data compared to where we were, you know, just a short 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, thank you for inviting me on, and look forward to having a debate with others in the room.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but by no means least, someone I know very well, Adam Rutzler from Arsenal. We've worked together for the best part of the last 11 years. So please, let's hear your introduction.
Thanks, Mick. Great to see you again. And thank you very much for having me, everyone. So, as Mick said, Adam Rutzler at Arsenal Football Club. I've been there for 12 years now. So, yeah, the role of data at Arsenal has evolved quite significantly. And so at the moment, I oversee the data, insight, BI, and the campaign teams. So the kind of role that data plays at Arsenal is quite broad, from tracking performance to optimizing our output to improving operations, right through to things like strategic objective setting. And as Fiona said, like at Winners, she gets to work with a number of organisations we sit in the commercial function, but kind of centrally. So our work and world is very varied, from working with the venue team to partnerships to memberships to retail. So we're across the kind of broad spectrum, right through even to kind of social and comms, where Jake sits at Lincoln. So yeah, really looking forward to this afternoon, and thanks for having me.
Okay, so as you can tell, we've got a really good mixed bag of experience when it comes to data, and so I'm going to open it to the floor, and let's talk about, as leaders in sport and data leaders in sport, what do you find are your current challenges that you're facing? And Adam, why don't I just continue with you?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. So I think the challenges have changed quite significantly over the time I was at Arsenal, or I am at Arsenal. So initially it was all about kind of understanding, awareness of data, what data can do for all the different business areas. And to be honest, kind of buy into that, because there was a lot of people who, like me, had been at Arsenal a long time, and were kind of set in a certain way of thinking. So I think that was the challenge previously. But now, thanks to a lot of the investment and the kind of progress we've made within kind of data and insight, if you like, I think that the challenge has shifted to one of excessive demand. So we're often kind of victims of our own success. Once you do a good piece of work, it gets shared, it gets discussed, there's good kind of action off the back of it. That area will want more of that type of work, and other areas will want to kind of talk to you and see what you can do kind of for them, and you get more kind of established in that business area. So yeah, I'd say that the main challenge for us is demand, and obviously the kind of thing that goes alongside that is resource, and that sports organisations, as Fiona would probably know better than anyone, are quite slim in terms of resource. So demand is definitely a factor for us.
So a victim of your own success.
I think so. I hope you'd agree, Mick.
Oh, of course. And Jake, following that theme in terms of your experience working for a football brand as well, what would you say your biggest challenges are?
Resource, I think, would be one of our biggest challenges. We are quite a small team, and between us in the communications team at the club, we cover the first team, the women's team, the foundation, and the academy. So, you know, resources for us is a huge one. The time it takes to get, you know, all of the content together. And I think from our perspective, there's lots of great things that we can do, and we work with winners, and we have lots of ideas and of where we go next. But I think for us, we pick those that will probably have the biggest impact on the largest amount of people to help ROI. So if there's something that maybe a smaller task that might bring in a little bit of revenue, we might park that for a little bit further down the line until we've got, you know, the resources to deal with that. But if there's something that could impact our 6,500 season ticket holders straight away, then we will take that option to have the biggest impact, I think. So yeah, resources, and just touching on what Adam said in terms of the demand from fans. Everybody wants things instantly. You know, they expect us to communicate with them efficiently all of the time. They want everything, you know, at the tip of their fingertips, on their mobiles, etc. And they want it now. So yeah, it is a challenge as well. But for us, the main one is resource, definitely.
Great, thank you. So Fiona, I mean, that's a really interesting area that we just covered there around availability of resources and resource pressures. Working for a consultancy that helps organisations fill those resource gaps, where's your biggest challenge?
So I know Adam and Jake just referred to resources, and we all thought they meant people, but sometimes resource also means budget, because when you don't have budget, you can't pay for those people. So it can be challenging for us when we're trying to support our clients and move them forward. As Jake said, you know, they've got to choose. So when we're moving our clients forward and trying to progress their capability, we're trying to do it at a pace that's right for their business. so that they are generating that return on investment. But that resource issue, not just people, but also sometimes budget can be a challenge. But I actually want to table one here that I find quite challenging, or less of a challenge and more of a frustration. And it's when software vendors sell their product as a silver bullet. So we often come up against organizations saying, well, I don't need people because I've got this software and I've been sold it and I've been told, use this software and you're going to be able to do whatever you want with data. And of course, we all know, the practitioners in the room know that that's not the case. So I think until we can get software vendors to think less about ticking the box on a sale and instead ticking a box on their client being able to use the software to generate the results they bought it for, then we're going to continue to be in this challenging area. I have seen over the years a number of software vendors in our space take the decision to add consultancy services into their offering, not just traditional client onboarding, but actually stay with the client to help ensure the software can work.
Thank you. And that's a really interesting point, because you do come across a lot of vendors that are very good at selling their products, but not very good at implementing them. And I guess, you know, when we hear around challenges on resources and budgets, that can cause a little bit of a challenge around how much effort does it take to implement a new software, which will cause you a large amount of pain in the short term versus the long-term benefits you'll get once it's been delivered correctly. So yeah, I think that you raised a really good point there. So Kirk, how about you in your world? You're dealing with data in a very different space, I guess, and really focused on that partnerships and leveraging value out of those partnerships that take place between a sporting property and the brands that they choose to partner with. Where would you see the biggest challenges?
Well, first I need to point out, because everyone wants to know, that's a 1914 barber chair behind me. It is not a dentist chair. I am not sick. Okay, I just want to tell you. Now that next, that problem being dealt with. The biggest problem that we face is, you know, the term data scientist, right? Disney has 30 data scientists with PhDs working, you know, all their magic, if you will, with data. But kind of back to what Jake was saying, you go to a team and they might have one person in charge of BI. I know that's true of some of the Premier League teams. We're certainly down to third tier and second tier, probably. Same thing in the US. We might have some with many, but there are no data, rarely, I would say, are there data scientists at the team level. And so it's really almost, they don't believe in science. I don't know if y'all have that phrase in the UK, don't you believe in science? I mean, that's what I want to say, is they don't really believe in science. And then when we get to data, they don't understand data structure. They don't understand the scientific method to deduce results instead of leading people to the results they want. So really it is a scientific issue that so few understand because of lack of resources and training and so on.
Okay, so taking that challenge away, how do you address it from your perspective, Kirk, around, right, okay, don't they believe in science? I'm a scientist, this is what we do. How do you convince the organization that there is that gap, and how do you create the value around that gap?
Doesn't always happen, of course, but it's largely why I started the business I did, and it's taken off so fast because people realize that this industry has been fraught with properties reporting to brands in a way that they control, and so it's only good news, you know, that seems to come out of the team side. And so there's been a high demand for something that is scientific and unbiased. And so now how to convince them, I think it is that no matter, I mean, Adam, you guys and Mick, you've done this for a long time. You may be able to do some of the things that we do, but it's still you reporting it, you know, from the team. So we are that third party experts to come in and help. So that tends to do it. And then number two is, we've got a database now of 800 some odd partnerships we've measured. So we have comparison data. Number one question that comes out of any data analyst, I'm sure over everybody on this panel, looking at data is basically context, right? Compared to what? So we've got a database now. We can give you results compared to everybody else in the category across the United States. And by the way, I should point out, we're coming to India, starting with cricket. We'd love to do some football.
Okay.
So that's basically.
And Adam, what about yourself? Where are you seeing those barriers to success, and what's your approach to overcoming them?
The one thing I'd jump in on Kirk's point there about, don't you believe in science? I think one of the big challenges that my team have had to face and have to overcome over the last few years is actually, we might be the people behind the analytics, the data science, whatever you want to kind of refer to it as, but it's almost a translation of what we're doing into kind of business friendly kind of terminology to understand their objectives, understand their challenges, but actually they're just people at the end of the day, and understanding their level of competency to have the type of conversation we want. So we might actually step it away from the kind of logic, the science, the algorithms, the modeling, into real kind of business friendly terminology, replaying back to them their objectives, their challenge, and how we feel the outcome of what we're doing can really kind of step them forward. And that's where we've got some of the biggest successes. So I just wanted to jump in on that point. And in terms of some of the biggest barriers, Mick, I think the main one that I would say is consistency of data. And yes, it might be kind of fairly kind of boring response to this question, but it's really, really fundamental, which is we sit in a central team and have access to a lot of different data sources, but so do the kind of venue team, the retail team, the hospitality team. And as a business, we might be asked one question and everyone answers it slightly differently because they've got different sources of data that have different logic behind them, that have different timings of integrations, whatever the reason may be. It might be quite a simple question. How many away shirts did we sell yesterday? Someone might be looking at a certain model, certain time of that, a certain whatever it might be. And it's really about the barriers to success are the fact that people have all those different views of data. And the kind of phrase that I'm trying to use internally these days is we need to be an organization that looks at the single source of the truth through a single pane of glass. And that is something that through our kind of BI rollout, utilizing Tableau, that's our pane of glass, and we need the single source of truth to make sure everybody is on the same page. That's definitely one of the biggest barriers for us.
So Fiona, as a consultant, how do you help businesses address those challenges?
Well, building on, I've got two particular things to comment on. One is building on Adam's start of his response, which was about using user-friendly jargon. We like to demystify, we like to simplify. I don't want my clients to be worried about integrations or data standards or anything like that. I want to give them the solution that they're after, answer their question. So simplifying things in the way we speak to people who do not have the in-depth knowledge that we do. But secondly, I'm a big believer in delivering quick wins. I know you are as well, Mick. We've talked about this oftentimes, that helping people to understand, bringing them along on the journey, breaking down internal barriers. One of the best ways to do that is to be constantly delivering quick wins, almost not dissimilar to what Jake was talking about, finding the low-hanging fruit, things that might make a big difference quickly with minimal additional investment in time, people or processes to show what the future could look like. So quick wins and simplifying things.
Okay. And Jake, working for an organisation that's, not going to have the same budget as a Premier League football club, how do you prioritize those challenges along with your leadership in the club? How do you get them really behind what data can deliver for the organisation?
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky in some respect that we have a CEO who's really, data driven. He's come in and he's a big believer in data, and he's kind of spread that down into our team. So especially since working with Fiona, we're constantly thinking now, what can data do for us? What more info can we get on our fans? And I think you know, some of the barriers that we've got is because, like you said, we're not a huge organization. A lot of our stuff is outsourced. So we have Ticketmaster as a ticketing partner. We have a company called Elite Pro Sports as our retail partner, etc. And like a lot of them don't talk to each other. There's no single one view. They all have different parts of data, just because we're not retail experts, but we're also not ticketing experts. And then we have Elior who do our catering, and we're not catering experts either. So we do outsource. We do have one centralized data point, and Fiona and the team at Winners kind of, you know, look after that. But some of them don't have APIs. There's a lot of manual exports in. It's just a little bit messy. So going back to the data stuff that Adam mentioned earlier, some of our data is really clean. Some of it's not. So yeah, that's the main barrier for us. But I think we're on the right track. We're going in the right direction. You know, since Winners have come on board, and we've grown so much in such a short space of time. So, for example, 5 years ago, we were in the 5th tier of English football. Now we're in the 3rd. We've gone on an amazing journey since. Our support base has gone from, you know, having 1,000 season ticket holders to 6,500 season ticket holders. We've gone from attendances that were 2,500 to 3,000 to, you know, 80, 90% capacities most weeks. So the growth of this club has been incredible, but we need to capture all of that data to continue that trajectory, because I think in football, you can't have success all of the time. I've been really lucky because we've won so many trophies and been on this journey that's just been an upward trajectory, but you can't do that forever on the pitch. So as soon as things disappear, like, you know, success doesn't come all at once. I know people who have worked in sport 30 years have never been promoted. So like, I'm really, really fortunate to have had 2 promotions, a Wembley win in the final. We were 1 game away from the championship, you know, a couple of seasons ago. So I think with our support base, a lot of them are new fans who may have supported a larger club like an Arsenal or a Manchester United before, but they've seen this journey that Lincoln have been on and they've thought, yeah, I want a piece of that. So for us, data has been really important to kind of keep hold of them, keep them on the journey and stop them dropping off. And results have dropped off in recent times, but the fans are kind of still stuck with us. So I think that's down to the good work we've done as a team, and the leadership we've got here at the club to try and, you know, keep them on that journey with us, because ultimately people want to see winning football. But if there's not success on the pitch and we communicate with them in the right way, you know, the stuff that we've implemented with Fiona, from, you know, we now know the genders and the ages and, you know, where supporters sit in the stadium and, you know, where they live and things like this. And then we can tailor those marketing messages and service emails to those guys, because we've got that data at our fingertips. Whereas 5 years ago, we literally had a large database and it would just be, you know, a marketing piece to the whole group that people may not be interested in. So now we can, you know, segment and tailor things to specific audiences, which has changed our world effectively.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point. And you know, we used to discuss it all the time, which is seasonality of sport is really different to other industries. When you start thinking about, when you look season to season, you never play the same set of games in the same order. Weather's a massive factor, especially in UK sport, not so much in American stadium when they can put a roof on, but you know, it's so all of these influencing factors, you know, and you can look back over time and go, well, why was that game like that? And, you know, and suddenly you'd be like, well, there was really heavy snow and no one could get to the stadium. There was a train strike, you know, in the current climate that's impacting people's abilities to get to games. And it's, how do you, and Kurt, this is one for you, is, you know, when you talk about data science, as sporting entities, how should we go about trying to factor in all of those variables that wouldn't necessarily hit other businesses that have the same sales patterns of, you know, if you're a fashion retailer, you've got summer, winter, autumn, you know, you're not, yeah, you'll get in variables on the weather, but not so specific around those big moments in time that sporting organizations have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think Fiona's group and others help a lot with that and can give the data input. I know Arsenal has a lot of that data that they can do a lot of that modeling and so on. But aside from the partnership stuff, I do a lot of ticketing research as well. And I think it's still kind of a data science question, and being able to do advanced modeling, but you have to account for all those individual factors, like you're saying, in any kind of statistical model. And so it's really just having the data. To me, it's data structure. So it's all the planning that goes into thinking about what possibly do we need to measure. And so if you're thinking about weather, whatever else it is, I mean, I have not personally dealt with that particular one, but individual fan differences by game, by whatever it is, you got to think about that well ahead of time, right? Fiona, I'm sure your group often is trying to merge together different data sets, which are measured in different dimensions or different measures. And so it's thinking way ahead, I think, is the answer. I don't think I have an exact answer to your question, Mick, other than think about the big structure and then you can solve the little problems.
Yeah, Adam, Arsenal are flying high at the moment, top of the league, 5 games, in a row. That has an impact, I know, on traffic. It's, there'll be a lot of demand of people to watch the match highlights. How do Arsenal take advantage of leveraging in that and those opportunities, which, best will in the world, I don't think anyone would have said, right, they're going to win the first 5 games of the season, which creates massive jump in traffic. And then how do you factor that into what you're planning from a data perspective?
It's a really interesting one, because on top of your point around variables, what day of the week is a fixture? Are you top of the league? Are you 5th in the league? Is it what is the weather? What's the weather that kind of day? One of the really interesting things is how sentiment affects what you're doing. So, for example, I mentioned the campaign team earlier. You're trying to run lots of tests on what kind of campaign might resonate best with different audiences. But if you do that test, as you say, Nick, when you're top of the league after 5 wins out of 5 versus, as we were this time last season, bottom of the league after 5 games, actually, you could be running a really, really good test back then, but it performed so poorly. So some of the things we've done are we just try to really isolate the performance element and the sentiment element. So run the same test multiple times. Using control cells is really important, whether you want a static control or a dynamic control. These are all types of things that we do to eliminate whether it's variables, whether it's sentiment. But like Kirk, Mick, I've got no golden bullet for you here, because it's one of those difficult pieces of working within sport. But again, just like Jake mentions, lucky enough to see a couple of promotions over the last couple of years. It's one of those things you've got to accept if you want to ride the highs of working within sports as well.
Hey, Mick, if I can jump right back in, I thought of a better answer, which is actually we did some studies. It was actually on Baylor football and also some others we did. We actually found it boiled down to attendance wise. Yeah, it was day of the week, whether it was a conference game, rival basically. But then all else I really needed to know was fan passion. You mentioned sentiment, but we measure passion, heart, mind, body, and soul. 4 questions. If I know somebody's passion level, or I know the audience's passion levels in general, and I know how far they live from, say Arsenal Stadium, so distance from the venue and passion predicted attendance, I almost didn't need to know anything else, except for the day of the week and, conference game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to take a change of tack now. And I was really surprised that no one mentioned regulation. And we all know that can be one of the biggest challenges around what we're allowed to do, what permissions do we have with the data we have, who are we allowed to contact. And I know this is a particularly relevant point because I believe that regulation is coming into India specifically, which will be along the same lines of the GDPR regulation that exists in Europe. So as a data regulation champion, Fiona, how do you as an organization help businesses overcome what is quite challenging regulation if you don't really understand it? I think if you've got a good grasp of it, then it's a lot easier to do things, but regulation is not an easy thing to retrospectively apply to an organization when it's collected data. So how do you go about that challenge?
Yeah, so firstly, the reason I didn't bring it up as a challenge is because I don't see it as a challenge, because whatever data legislation you're operating under there, it's almost like the rules, yeah. And so when somebody asks you what was your challenge between getting from here to London, you're never going to say I could only go 70 miles an hour, because the 70 miles an hour is a rule. You can't break that. And actually, I believe that the data legislation is there to help and support us and not actually to challenge us. But you're right, it can be challenging for people who don't understand it. And the downside is the majority of people that understand this are legal people, and legal people speaking a different language to us, or particularly to business people. So it can be quite difficult. How do we overcome it? Well, a starting point for us is we accept and we acknowledge that there is a black and a white in the law, but there's also a lot of grey. And our role is to help our clients or the rights owners interpret the grey to their own business case and to do a risk assessment. Black and the white, we're not going to shy away from that. We know what has to be done. The only other caveat I would add to that, though, is none of the data legislation bodies have brought in legislation that's going to cause a business to fail. Yeah. So they're not saying you've now got to spend 7 times your budget on technology and process and legal fees to be able to follow our legislation. They're saying, I need you to demonstrate that you are showing the legislation to the best of your capability. And most importantly, because this is the foundation of the legislation you're talking about, is that you're thinking of your customers or the data subjects, your fans, your customers, your web visitors, you're thinking of them first. That's what they're asking you to do. So that's why we don't see it as a challenge, because we are pragmatic about the way we interpret it and the way we apply it. And we know that no data legislation office is expecting somebody to invest in the type of technology or quantity of lawyers or thought process that, for example, Amazon or Spotify can afford. It's not the case. So that's why we never bring it up as a challenge, and we don't see it as a challenge, but we know how to deal with it. And yes, you're right. Kirk, you can sit there grinning because you don't have to deal with the GDPR. You know, it's staggering the number of hoops, as Mick referred to, that we have to go through. And yeah, we believe that the same sort of legislation is heading towards India's way. But to anybody listening to this, I would say don't be afraid of it. Don't let it be a challenge. Embrace it. Learn as much as you can about it, but also be prepared or be aware that it's your role to interpret it to your business case, to your business use.
And I think if I can
sorry, go on, Adam.
Nick, if I can just jump in there, I think it's a really good point Fiona makes about kind of embracing it. And actually, if you are doing a job of looking at things from a fan first perspective, you haven't actually got too much kind of change of thinking, change of mentality to do. And given my team at Arsenal, we are the kind of champions of fan first. We have the data, and we really want to make sure that all the different kind of business areas, all the verticals of our business are thinking about that supporter and that supporter experience, rather than just delivering, whether it's the venues, KPIs, or retail or hospitality. They can get quite single-minded around that. So it's actually been helpful to a degree to ensure the business comes along that and starts thinking fan first. And at Arsenal, we have quite a robust kind of process with a data protection officer, a legal team that we have a kind of, weekly meetings with to make sure everything we're doing is compliant. So just thought I'd throw that in there from an Arsenal perspective, Mick, before you jump on.
Yeah, and I think Fiona's right to say it's not a challenge, but I do think people that aren't experienced in it will definitely see it as a challenge, because it's quite easy to say, right, we have processes in place. I think the process I would always follow is, if you're being open and honest with your fan base around what you're trying to achieve and why you need things, then you're helping them understand why you need the data. And I think half the time people will put up in front of you, opt in if you want a marketing communication, right? Okay, what does that even mean? So explain to you, right, if we have your data and permission to use your data, we then have an opportunity to tailor the types of communications we send you, allow you to get a better relationship with your club, be closer to that club, and then be presented with different types of communications that resonate. But I also feel there is an obligation on clubs, and it becomes quite interesting when you see the way that clubs talk about the amount of data they have, which is never really in the fans' interest, but always in the partner's interest to say, I've got a big number, as opposed to I've got a group of really engaged fans that really want to hear about your offer. And these are the people that we should be talking to. And I think there is a level of sophistication that needs to be developed around actually a brand wants strong engagement with the fan base, right? And I think we heard it in the earlier session around it's a partnership. And to get the most out of those partnership relationships are the brands that really embrace engaging with fans in a way that resonates the relationship between the brand and the sporting entity. And I don't know, Jake, from a Lincoln perspective, is that something that you're focused on? You know, how do you leverage permission to, you know, bring your partners closer to your fan base?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a tough one to answer. Yeah, I don't know, Fiona, we work with you in terms of bringing partners close. What would you say to that? Oh, you're on mute.
Obviously, everything we do is GDPR compliant, but we're fortunate that we work in sport, that people think that working with partners means giving our database when we can't, we don't, and that negates the whole value of sponsorship. I think it's probably fair to say that Lincoln City have not done much of the interesting leveraging with partners and data that you would hope, purely because of their resources issue and their priorities. So the most we've done is make sure that partner messages are being delivered by Lincoln City for segments of fans that are relevant to the partner. Yeah.
We've had one today, actually, Fiona. I don't know if I sent one across to Rachel and Nicholson's, who are accountants, wanted to send a message out to businesses about, you know, their what they offer and stuff. But we know straight away that won't go down well with fans if we send it out to them. So we're then quite clever and pick our lists that we'd send it to. They'd probably want it to go wider, selfishly for them, because it might have an impact, and there could be some low-hanging fruit there that it works for a fan who's got a business that isn't in our business list or whatever on segmentation. But yeah, Fiona's absolutely right. We don't want fans to receive email communications from us that doesn't interest them. So you know, if we're sending that kind of stuff out, the unsubscribe button is so easy to press, and then, you know, we might lose future sales. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's written in the agreement with the commercial team, I guess. So yeah, we do what they tell us.
But to Mick's point, you've probably got your commercial team going, this is how big our database is. But when it comes to the reality of it, you're only going to send that particular message to a segment that's of that size.
But then it does work in other ways as well, Mick. So, for example, we work with LNER, who are obviously one of the main East Coast train operators in the country. And a few years ago, they branched out to Lincoln. So Lincoln to London was done within an hour and 45 minutes or something similar to that. But, you know, now that they're a partner and they're willing to offer 25% discount on all trains to all of our fans, then they're desperate to hear from us about that. They've been pestering us all summer about, you know, what's my LNER discount code so I can get to London cheap. So swings both ways. If it benefits the fans, they're all in for it. But if it doesn't benefit them, then it's one to avoid.
So that's authenticity, right? And that's what we talk about. It's around, you've got the data points. We know what our fans engage with. There's a cost of living crisis. You've got a strategic partner that's going to link in to help fans get to games, right? That's your sweet spot. As you said, when you get a partner who just says, I want to talk about my products and services and forget the fact you're a football club and your interest is how you connect that into you're going to get a worse result. It's just logical. And it's, you know, and I know at Arsenal and Adam's team have done a huge amount of work around that education. It goes from the point of sale of the relationship with the partner all the way through to the execution of the rights, even making sure that the mix of the rights that are granted are key, because there's nothing worse than day one of a partnership. Partner wants to do Y, we can't deliver it because of X, Y, Z, and that's I think that's the challenge, you know, and that's why when you're thinking about regulation, when you're thinking about commercial partnerships, when you're thinking about fan engagement, they're not islands. They're all routes on a journey, and you need to have them together. So, Kirk, you're expanding your operation into more regulated countries than the US. How do you go about addressing that in the work that you do?
Always with a little bit of help from our friends, right, to understand what's going on in the local climate. You know, we did do work for the Open in the UK a few years back, and so again, Two Circles helped us out with some of the data side. So I guess tip one is get somebody local that knows what's up to get some help. But Fiona says it's not a challenge. I'm a little bit fearful because of how it is in the United States versus there. I mean, we do have California, which is practically like the UK in some of those respects. So I have some familiarity with it. But yeah, I'm ready for some challenges. But we have a local agency that's going to help us in India, who should, I hope, be managing those things.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's a bit around the regulation. Now, the one thing that we're all witnessing and being part of is just this explosion of digital channels through which we need to operate. And a few years ago, it was all about direct mail being sent out to fans and then a little bit of email. Now it's about how's my brand presence online, how am I using sponsored advertising, how am I doing online journey orchestration, SMS, MMS, there's just so many channels. And then we've got the explosion and Web 3.0, what's your approach to dealing with the pace of which the digital channels develops, and how do you maintain authenticity across those channels? Adam.
So in terms of how we want to show up across those channels, we have invested heavily over the past 2 years about building out a new, fresh brand strategy. So that is a culmination of a lot of research that we did about what's important to our fans globally and how we feel moving forward in an ever-changing environment that we want to show up to our fans. So that's how we want to show up in terms of all the digital channels and how we kind of navigate that landscape. The overarching principle that we're trying to deliver is moving away from delivering what we want, what the club want, when we want, and we're a case in point about that. Moving to what our supporters want when they want it, and that principle is easy, but the execution of that is very difficult. We want to move to what they want when they want, i.e. understanding a fan, who they are, their behavior, how they're interacting across the channels they're interacting on. We've got lots of different technology that we need to integrate, lots of different data that we need to format and flow to the right place in a timely manner to make that possible. But in principle, that's what we're trying to achieve. Brand strategy, how we want to show up, and moving from a kind of old approach of essentially retail coming to us saying, we've got a new training where it's really big for us, send this to as many people as you can next week. That's all on Arsenal Football Club's terms. But we need to be more about understanding who our supporters are and giving them what they want when we want it, when they want it.
Okay, thank you. Jake, anything to add to? You're on mute.
Sorry, pound in the jar. Just a really good point that Adam made there in terms of what fans want and when they want it. I think that's where certainly for us, where testing of times and all your open rates, your click-through rates, etc., come in handy. And then we use those stats to announce whether it's a player signing or if it's a big piece of news that we've got that we want to put out that we think will have a big impact with fans. We might not do that at 10 a.m. in the morning when people are getting stuck into their emails at work or whatever it may be, but it might be a case where we do it, 6:30, 7, where they're sat at home watching the telly or getting ready for the football or whatever it might be. So we look at performance of campaigns in terms of what impacts the most open rates, the most click-through rates, and then we kind of use that moving forward to give the fans what they want. Although more difficult for Adam because they have a huge global fan base with supporters across the world. Most of our fans are within the UK, and then second would be the US, and then thirdly Spain. So yeah, that's kind of what our land looks like.
And Fiona, I guess, as a provider of services to sporting entities, you have the same challenge. How do you keep up with the channels that are emerging all the time and provide coverage to your clients across the mix?
So, I mean, generally for our particular business, we're quite fortunate. We stay very focused on PII data, and many of the emerging channels are in the social space. And you'll know what it's like working with a social channel. They own the data, not you, and you only get access to it when you implement certain processes or pay certain amounts. So we don't worry about staying on top of every single channel. We pay attention more to the channels that are part of a data ecosystem that will allow and support that transfer of data. But primarily, our role is to, well, you know, I'm going to say this, aren't I, based on the Simon Sinek book, start with why. What is the channel that's going to make the difference? What is it that the client's trying to achieve, and then perhaps look for the channel that's going to help them achieve that. So as opposed to trying to understand each and everything out there, what is it? Something like 25,000 new, you know, digital applications every year or something daft like that. It's impossible to stay on top. So number one, we stay focused on those that can be part of a structured or PII data in ecosystem, and number two, what are the channels that are going to make most difference to our clients and therefore our clients' fans.
Okay. And Kirk, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, actually something very timely. This week, on the behalf of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who were guests of a program we were doing, we polled students as to where they bought something recently, and half of them had bought a product off of Instagram, 1/3 off of TikTok, and then like nothing out of Twitter, as you might guess, and a few Facebook, and then of course a lot from email campaigns. But the point, I think, upshot is what you need to be thinking about is you need to hang out where the cool kids are, right? You don't hang out and try to just send stuff. I think Adam was trying to get to that earlier, not thinking about just what we want to tell you, right? But go where they are. I learned, I think if I understood correctly, Ticketmaster is now on TikTok, and they're doing campaigns through TikTok. I suggested to the chief ticketing officer at the Buccaneers that he could be dancing and be pitching tickets at the same time. Anyway.
But to my point, can I just reiterate that if the way that the shopping cart in Instagram is set up, if it doesn't allow the rights owner to access the data or the ticketing vendor to access the data to pass on to the rights owner, then they might get immediate sales, but their long-term business sustainability will be impacted because they won't get the data. So if you're working with a shopping cart in a social channel where the business model does not allow you the access to the data, and by the way, that's the same on Amazon. You know, you build a store on Amazon. I don't know any rights owner that's actually able to access the transactional data, apart from this is how many were sold. Then whilst you're getting that volume of sale from Amazon, you're losing the, not just the business intelligence, but also the ability to engage directly with the consumer. So it's always a toss-up, short-term gain, long-term business sustainability. And, you know, the end result really is actually you've got to spread yourself around and do a bit of each.
Yeah, and I think that's a relevant point around, you know, you need to be, the challenge we have is data is everywhere. And you need to be pretty broad-shouldered in an organization that has many complex makeup within the organization. I think sporting entities are very different because they are lots of different unique businesses, in that you bring them together, and when you're trying to govern the data centrally, if you're not involved in every conversation, then you know you end up in situations where you can't access the data, or the data doesn't fit to the model that you're trying to do, or like Adam's earlier pointed out, there's a different interpretation of what the fields mean because you're not being consistent across different channels and different suppliers. So yeah, data governance is something that, you know, really needs to be thought about in an organization. And, you know, even having some basic principles. And I know when we were at Arsenal, we would just say these are the minimum data fields that we'd want to be collected. And that way, at least we know we'd be able to do X, Y, and Z with that data once we have it. And there's nothing worse than somebody turning around and saying, here's 200,000 records, and then you turn around and going, I can't do anything with it, because no one's thought about the why are we collecting that information and what do we need to do with it. So I just need to check how we're doing for time. I don't know if you're on mute again, Fiona.
Serby, are we still to carry on, or should we be closing now? Should we be closing now, Serby, or are we carrying on?
No, if it's done, we can just. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike, for this session. I must say it was a mic dropping session. And thank you to all our panelists as well, Jake, Adam, Kirk, and Fiona, for such an interesting and exciting session. Thank you so much. And for all you viewers, stay put, because we are coming back shortly with another session for the day, referring the decisive whistleblower.